Welcome to the Valve Studio. This is part 6 of my interview with Willie, aka Lord Valve, and we cover a lot of different topics in this segment. We talk about synesthesia, and we talk about him being a keyboardist, digital front ends, fuzz, and how guitar players handle effects. I ask him, what kind of recommendations would you give to starting guitar amplifier designers to further along their activities in that front? And he goes into that a little bit. And we talk a little bit about Neets. He'll kind of tell you what that is. And then we get to the part at the end. There's very good discussion about tube amplifier evangelizing and education of the general public. A lot of people don't know what that is, and he has it's an excellent analogy between steam power and tube amplifiers, and then he gets into transistors. So sit back and enjoy. This is part 6 of 7. There's one more after this. If you haven't watched 1 through 5, it's packed full of knowledge from someone who's been working on tube amplifiers for the last 50 plus years. Okay, let's turn it over to Lord Valve. So I came in here about a month ago and I talked to you about doing this interview, and you mentioned this fact that you have this cross-coupling between your sight and your hearing.
Right.
And you told me what it was, and so I looked it up, and it's called what is it called?
Synesthesia.
Synesthesia. I did a search for that, and I found out that is a very common thing. In fact, about 4% of the population have this cross-coupling in their brain for their senses.
Well, that's 1 out of 25. That's not terribly common, but it's more common than you would think.
And the most common is this thing called chromesthesia, which is where your hearing is cross-coupled with your visual cortex.
Right.
And so you have this particular...
That's what I have.
And did you always know that you had it?
I'll tell you, it's a funny thing about that. When I was a little kid, like 5 or 6 years old, and, started actively listening to stuff, like music on the radio or, stuff like that, and I could see this stuff. I didn't know what it was. And one time, I told my mom, I said, well, I can see the sound. Of course, at that age, I didn't have a tremendous vocabulary, so I said I could see the sound. And I'm telling you, man, she gave me a look like I said I just ate a cat turd or something. And I thought, uh-oh, this is a bad thing. I better not talk about this.
Right.
So I never said anything about it to anybody. I just said, well, that's what it is, and I'm a weirdo, and I just, don't tell anybody about this. And then when I was about 15, I was in the dentist's office waiting to get my teeth drilled, and or something. And there was these magazines there. There was this medical magazine, and I picked it up and I started reading, and there was an article about synesthesia. And after I read what it was and that other people could do it too, I was like, wow, I'm not crazy. Out of sight, So then, I started actively using it,
Like what's examples of that?
To learn I'm an organist, okay?
Okay.
I'm a jazz organist. I'm pretty good. I've been playing 55 years.
Mm-hmm.
I used it to help me learn tunes. That's not exactly the right word. Anyway, I know if I can get the look right,
Okay.
everything else will follow.
Interesting. Do you need to hear the piece first?
Yeah.
And then from there you...
Oh, we're not talking about reading sheet music.
No, okay. So somehow you perceive the music piece that you're trying to play.
I'm listening to.
You're listening to it, and because of your tie-in with your visual, you have more capability of it's easier for you to figure it out because you're...
Well, I think it's easier, but then again, I don't have anything to compare it to because that's
Yes.
the way I've always been doing it.
Right. That's yes.
You know, and that ties into building amplifiers too. I mean, you know, if I can get that look right, you know, when I hear certain things, I can say, yeah, that's what I'm looking for, you know.
Okay.
It's a hard thing to explain.
No, I understand. Well, no, I don't understand that. I'll probably never understand what you're doing. But can you see like harmonic content? Or do you kind of explain it?
I don't, that's putting too fine of a point on it.
Okay.
You know, and it's real hard to try and tell anybody what it actually looks like, because it's not like looking at a movie or something. Mm-hmm. You know, it's there, but it's kind of meshed in with the sound. There's no good words for describing that. Probably somebody who was a clinical psychologist or something could, you know, speak with authority on that. I don't know what it is, but it definitely sometimes, and it kind of it comes and goes too. I mean, some days it'd be really strong. Mm-hmm. Some days it'd be so much of it that I can't drive and listen to the radio because it's too distracting.
Okay.
And then other days I hardly notice it at all.
Do you get an amp in here that somebody else worked on that they just recently worked on it, and you listen to it and it just is horrible?
Yes.
And you say, I don't know who did this for you, but they didn't know what they were doing, and you had to fix it then, even though it came from someone that claimed it was fixed?
I get a lot of those. See, at least in Denver, I'm the court of last resort for vacuum tube amps.
Oh, okay.
I mean, there are other guys out there to talk a good game and all the rest, and no disrespect to them. Some of their stuff that they turn out is fine. Mm-hmm. But I've looked at stuff that looked like it was wired by a little kid.
No, I'm talking about from the tuning and the biasing and the
yeah, well, I'm talking about repairs.
Okay, right.
You know.
Okay.
I got an amp in from that had just had the output transformer replaced in. It was a Marshall.
Yep.
And the dude who replaced the transformer, who has a good reputation here for some reason, he didn't trim the leads. There was just a huge wad of wire
in the chassis,
folded up in the amp.
Okay.
He didn't stretch them out to where they got to go and cut them off and dress them and solder them in. He just bunched the whole thing together in a knot. And of course, the thing was oscillating like crazy.
Yeah. Talk about 60 hertz there as well.
I'm sorry?
Talk about 60 hertz as well.
Yes. All of that.
Right. So if you listen to an amplifier like blind, like you're in the dark and you listen to two amplifiers, can you tell that one is like a EL34 or 6L6 or does it even?
Maybe in a real broad sense, yeah, because 6L6s have that characteristic steeliness to them, and EL34s have that softness on the upper mid-range, you know. Mm-hmm. But, you know, the output stage, it really doesn't come into play that much until it's being driven really hard.
Okay.
You know, that's why I like those Mesa Boogie amps, you know. They could have a solid state output stage. It probably wouldn't sound any different because they do all their tricks in the preamp.
Right, okay. These certain amplifiers or types or anything like that just drive you crazy? They're very irritating?
I don't like the ones with the digital front end, man. I can't, even if they have a tube output stage, that tube output stage is mostly for marketing as far as I'm concerned, because you get all this digital crap going on in front of there, and it just, you know, you can listen to it and say, well, yeah, that kind of sounds like a deluxe reverb. And if you print it to tape, it doesn't sound bad. Well, we don't have tape anymore. Well, the guys I hang out with have tape.
Yeah, yeah.
But you put it to a recording, you know, even if it's a digital recording, and it can sound not half bad. But when you take a digital type amp on the stage, if you're playing at any kind of significant level, it just doesn't have the mojo. I don't know how to explain it. It doesn't sound right.
Okay.
And you know, I attempted to think that maybe it's because of the analog to digital converter. There's no such thing as headroom there. There's, when it gets to the, you know, all ones or whatever it is, it's going to make that elephant fart machine gun noise,
Yep.
period.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that digital overdrive is.
Yep.
And because of that, they got to knock the level way down before it goes in to keep it from doing that.
Mm-hmm.
And then they got to jack it back up on the other side after the digital to analog converter. And I think maybe that process of doing that, has something to do with those amps not being as responsive as a tube amp is, for instance. And I don't know that because I don't know crap about digital stuff and don't care.
That's fair. That's
Yeah.
why I'm here, actually,
Yeah.
because I wanted to. The point of this is to get your thoughts on various things.
I love the technology itself. I mean, that's really cool. Pro Tools and all that stuff, cell phones.
Yep.
That's internet. Wow, I've been reading science fiction since I was 7 years old, so I already knew about all this stuff before it got invented.
Mm-hmm.
I'm glad to see it show up.
But you're a purist on the tube amp side.
I like tubes. Well, let's let the tubes do what tubes are good at,
Okay.
which is sounding cool.
Right.
Let's let the solid state stuff do what it's good at, like making phase shifters and digital echo and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
All of that stuff is an emulation of something that came before. The phase shifter was invented because guitarists are a bunch of pussies and they don't want to carry Leslie's.
Okay.
Leslie
Yeah.
weighs 150 pounds and a little MXR phase 90, weighs 7 ounces, whatever it is. Same with tremolo and fuzz.
Yeah.
A guy cut a hole in his speaker with a razor blade to get that tone. I can't remember who that was. Maybe it was it Link Ray or it was one of the original weird guitar players,
Mm-hmm.
And from there's the fuzz tone, which was better than cutting a hole in your speaker.
Yeah.
Because you could turn it off.
So, I haven't been doing my education. I got out of high school and went to college, and tube amplifiers by then were gone out of the curriculum. So I learned about BJTs and
We were actually the last class, I believe, in the Navy that was all tube.
Okay.
After that, they started showing people about transistors and integrated circuits and stuff like that in 1968.
Yeah. Well, I didn't learn anything about them. I mean, I knew a tube tester was.
Yeah, the tube is historical now. And you're taking electronics course, they say, well, this is a tube, and this is what electronics was up until, and that's all you ever learn about it.
I don't think I even learned that.
Really?
Okay. But I've been doing renovations of some old radios that I bought, and then now I'm getting into doing tube amplifier design for the first time in 50 years. And what I'm finding now is the video content that's on the internet is all geared towards recapping your amplifier.
Yeah.
And there's not really a design component per se. It's more about repair and maintenance and those types of things. So what I'd like to get to is get to the point and get educational content where they want to not clone an amplifier. They want to start from scratch and do it and learn enough of the design aspect. So what advice would you give someone who has a box of tubes they got at a garage sale, and how should they go from that to having an amplifier?
Well, hook them up so no smoke comes out and it sounds okay. That's probably not the best way.
But I mean, what would they end up doing?
Well, there's circuits, there's software that emulates circuits like PSpice and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
And there's tube models for those.
Right.
Developed by various guys, So you could get in there and you could play with that, You could find out what not to do without smoking parts.
But there's a value to smoking parts.
Well, there's value to that, okay? Mm-hmm. Because you find out, that if you do this certain way, then that particular tube is only going to last about 10 minutes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
there's some value to that, or burning yourself, or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's a really cool utility on DuncanAmps.com.
Mm-hmm.
where I wrote an article about how to bias your amp, and that's been archived there for the last, I don't know, 15 years. It's considered one of the definitive articles about how to bias your tube amp.
Right.
It was written totally for noobs.
Okay.
You know, guys who don't know that they have to hold the cold end of the soldering iron.
Yeah.
I mean, noobs. And that's a good article, and a lot of people use it. And then he's got this thing. He's got a TDSL, a tube data sheet locator, which searches the whole net for tube data sheets, and you can click on them and download them and stuff. And he's got a tone stack calculator. Okay.
Yep. Which
you can pick whatever type of tone stack it is. You know, Baxendale or one of the passive ones or the whatever, and you can substitute different values of components and see what happens to the frequency response curve.
Right.
So if you're trying to get rid of that mid-range bump or whatever, you know, you can find out how to shift the bump up and down or make it smaller or whatever. And that's a really useful thing. It doesn't really it does the math for you.
You're right. Right.
In other words, it does what I would do if I actually was an EE and knew that math, and I don't, you know.
Right.
So that's a cool thing, and I didn't use it on any of the stuff that I did because I don't think it existed yet. But in the last 3 years, I think, is when he came out with that. And that's a pretty cool thing.
Yeah, the tone stack. I took a look at that. I also read your biasing article. I've read a lot of different things.
Cool.
And there's a ton of written content out there, as well as all the PDF versions of textbooks from the 40s and 50s at tubebooks.org, and I've been reading those as well.
And did you encounter the Neets, Neets?
I did. It's when I came back from here, when I was over here before, I looked at all the Neets.
That's a good one. Unit 6, man, on the vacuum tube.
Yeah.
Very good.
And there's another section in that same Neets about doing transformers as well.
Yeah, transformers, and then there's one module that's the Navy Technician's Handbook. That's got a lot of neat tricks in it and stuff.
Okay, I'll go ahead and put a reference to those in the...
Yeah, I don't remember what module that is, but I know it's in there.
Sure. Well, is there any other advice you want to give to budding amplifier, either repairmen or designers?
Well, I don't think you're going to get rich. You know.
No, at this point.
The thing is, you have to evangelize and you have to proselytize for tube amps, because younger people, they have no idea what it is. Even guitar players, you know.
You find that that's true.
They don't know. I tell people that I deal with vacuum tubes, and they think I'm talking about Hoover parts. Literally.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay.
You say vacuum tubes? You mean those things that go for the brush on the floor? Yeah, that's what I mean. I'll see you later. But really, they don't know what they are, and I show people. I usually have one in my pocket.
Yeah. What do you carry?
Here's one, and I say, "This is a vacuum tube," and they look at it like, "Oh." They have no idea what it is, and I tell them the story. I said, look, these are like steam. Once upon a time, steam was the main motive force on the planet. Everything that had a motor in it ran by steam. Okay, steam did everything. It drove the ships. It drove the trains. It drilled in mines. It heated skyscrapers. Still does too, and stuff like that. And then along came the internal combustion engine, which was lighter, which used a much more portable fuel. It was not as powerful, but it was more powerful on a weight versus horsepower basis. Mm-hmm. And the internal combustion engine cored out the entire center of steam power. The only thing steam's used for now is huge industrial processes, like heating skyscrapers or generating power.
Right.
And on the other end of that is hobbyists, guys who build these little model trains and stuff, you know. Mm-hmm. All the rest of steam is gone. I said, well, these were exactly the same. Everything that was electronic had these in it. Okay? They were hot, they were inefficient, they used a lot of power. Okay? But everything that was electronic, if you had something that was electronic, a TV, a radio, whatever it was, it had this in it. Mm-hmm. And along came the IC and the transistor, 1948, when the transistor was invented, and it cored the entire middle out of tubes. Okay? Every consumer item now has transistors and integrated circuits in it. And on the power end, you've got huge tubes that do stuff like 50,000 watt radio stations, mm-hmm. the 7 million watt radio station that they use to communicate with submarines while they're still under the water, mm-hmm. microwave retorting, which they use to cook oil out of shale, stuff like that, huge industrial processes. And on the other end, there's us, guitar players, hobbyists,
right. Yep.
You know, and that's what a tube is now.
That's a great analogy.
Well, it's how it happened.
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
Because back in the day, everybody knew what a tube was. You could go to the drugstore and they'd have a tube tester that said, you test them.
Yeah.
You pull the tubes out of your TV and stick them in there. And the ones that read bad, they had a cabinet underneath. You opened up the cabinet and the clerk pulled out the right ones and you paid for them and you went back and you stuck them in your TV and your TV worked.
We had that at Henderson's Pharmacy where I grew up.
Yeah?
And that pharmacy is now used for movie production. It's like mothballed, but
they kept it.
They kept it.
Oh, that's cool.
And it still has a tube tester in it.
Yeah, the first one I ever saw was I lived in the suburbs of D.C. when I was growing up. I was born in D.C. Mm-hmm. And they had a chain back there of drugstores called People's Drugstore.
Right.
Okay. And they had a you test them in the back, you know, so you test them. And this place that just went out of business down here, Fustell's, mm-hmm. they had 3 or 4 of those in there. You know?
Yeah.
And people would actually come in and try to test tubes on them. They're terrible tube testers.
They're just emissions testers.
Almost all of them were.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's it for today.
Okay.
I really thank you for taking the time out of your busy day to let us know about what you know.
Well, anything's better than having to fix stuff and suck solder smoke and actually make a living, you know. No thanks.
All right. Well, let me. I'm going to take some footage around here a little bit.
Okay.
Then,
you want me to turn the lights on?
Yeah, and I'll get out of your
Yeah,
hair.
I'll do that.
Okay. Thank you, Willie.
Okay.